Oh, it's not starting.
We are live, Annie.
Hi, guys. Welcome to the Hangout. I'm Annie. I'm the community manager here at Couchbase. We're interested in talking about anything and everything Couchbase. We're focusing on some new things coming up with the SDKs and partial to get your feedback. So let's introduce everybody. Here's Matt.
Hey, everyone. I'm Matt Ingenthron from Couchbase. I look after most of what's going on with the developer kind of stuff here for Couchbase, and so I'm really, really excited to have a bunch of folks here today. Thanks, Annie.
All right. And next is Brett.
Hey, I'm Brett Lawson. I do the development for the Node.js and PHP SDKs, as well as a little bit with libCouchbase.
All right. And then next is Don.
Hey, I'm Don Pinto. I'm a product manager at Couchbase, focusing on SDK development.
Okay, Jeff, want to say a few words?
Hi, I'm Jeffry Morris. I'm a developer advocate at Couchbase, specifically for the .NET SDK. Thank you.
Cool. Michael?
Yes, so Michael Nitschinger. I'm also part of the SDK team, and I'm more or less responsible for everything that has a Java or JVM tag on it. So, yeah.
Cool. Well, like Annie said, I want to say thanks to everyone for coming today, and of course, if you're watching the recorded broadcast later, thanks for watching. We've got some pretty cool stuff. As was mentioned, we've been thinking about for a while and working with our development community on the sort of what's next as far as the programming model and APIs are concerned with Couchbase. And what we wanted to really do is get your feedback. So I want to turn it over to Don Pinto, and Don's got a little bit of an introduction about what we're doing and what we're planning for. Don, over to you.
Sure, thank you. So I'm going to be sharing my slides shortly. Okay. Can you guys see the screen? I hope you can. So do we have a yes for that? Can you guys see the slides?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So we ran through the introduction. So what I'm going to talk to you today is mainly about our 2.0 SDKs. So we have come a long way with our SDKs, and also with Couchbase Server, transformed all the way from like a key value store to a document database, and this in turn introduced several new access patterns. So we have the key value, secondary indexes using views, and soon you would also see things like Nickel that would show up, which is querying for rich data. And when building the 2.0 SDKs for Couchbase Server, and also learning from what customers had to say and with the feedback we received in the field, there were a few things we decided to focus on. So the first thing is keeping it simple, powerful, consistent, and maintainable. So what do these mean for our SDKs? So simple is like making developers feel at home. What we want to say there is things like intuitiveness for the SDKs, and also making it easy to learn and use. The next thing is powerful, so making it more flexible for developers and allowing them to use the powerful language extensions. For example, you would see a demo later on how we could use LINQ in the case of .NET. Then there's also consistency, which is uniformity across the SDKs, but also interoperability between SDKs. And finally, maintainable. We have put a lot of effort to kind of improve the SDK core, so things like configuration, profiling, debugging, and all the great things. And we also want to make it easy to add new features in the future. So just a little bit on what's coming up for a little bit on 3.0, which Couchbase Server 3.0, and a new feature that we have exposed in the SDKs. So with the SDK 2.0, you'd be able to use SDK 2.0 to talk to Couchbase Server 3.0 and encrypt the connection between the client and the server. So later on, Jeff will show you a demo on how SSL can be used with the .NET client. There's also moving forward with Nickel. So Nickel, as I mentioned, is querying for rich data, and this feature is currently in developer preview. So with the emergence of big data and rich interactive applications, a rich data model is becoming more essential. So as you can see on the right, you have a person who has connections, who has credit cards, who buys products. This needs a rich data representation, which is represented in JSON. So what Nickel provides here is the ability to do JSON flexibility. It provides you to act on JSON documents and provides transitive closure. It gives you the expressiveness of SQL, and is also based on the non-first normal form. And for more information, you guys can check out query.couchbase.com. But more importantly, there is also a cool demo that we'll be showing on using Nickel in the SDKs with Java and .NET. So with that, I'd like to pass it on to Michael.
Thank you. So let me share my screen.
Thanks, Don. Well, Michael, while you're doing that, I just want to mention briefly, so we have a very uncreative term for all these new SDKs. We've been calling them the 2.0 SDKs, even though only 2 of the SDKs are going to their version 2.0. libcouchbase is actually going to version 2.4. But internally, we've and with other folks, we've just kind of referred to these changes as the 2.0 SDKs.
Okay, thanks, Matt. So can you see my screen?
Yep.
Perfect. So I'm really excited to show you all this stuff that we've been working on for a few months now, including all the pre-planning and iterating over it internally in our team. And it's pretty important for us that we now ship it to people and users as early as possible to get your feedback. And so let me just give you a few slides and give you a very brief overview of what we are trying to do or what we are trying to solve with these new APIs, and then we'll jump right into some actual Java code so that you can see how it works out in practice. Now, what we try to improve is a more intuitive workflow. So with the new SDKs, what you are doing is you are connecting to a cluster object of some form. And then you go ahead, you open buckets, you can close buckets, and then you can disconnect from the whole cluster thing. And if you think about it, that much more naturally feels how you also work with the user interface and how the server works as well. And not only does it provide a very nice flow of working with the APIs, what it also allows us inside the new SDKs is that we can do shared resource management and better component utilization, because a lot of the services that we are using underneath, under the covers, can be shared across buckets. You can think of it, for example, the configuration management or the view querying. We can use the underlying sockets and the underlying resources much more efficiently, and can give you better performance, throughput, and can make sure that we utilize your application servers on the SDK side as good as possible. And what this distinction also gives you is that you have a much better distinction between what you can do on the cluster level and what you can do at the bucket level. So you can think of it, if we provide things like creating buckets and deleting buckets, it makes sense to have those at the cluster level, while doing operational things like flushing the bucket or creating a design document. This works at the bucket level. So the whole flow and the resource utilization with this new model is much better and much more intuitive. Now, the other thing is the data management part, and it's really all about documents. With the current APIs, the API is very cache oriented. History, and it's awesome. But the Couchbase Server is very rapidly moving. So it is already a document-oriented database, and we are adding more and more document-oriented capabilities now. And to facilitate this as good as possible, what we are doing with the new SDKs is we are focusing more on the document side as well, on the client side. So we have managed, especially talking about Java here, because other languages have JSON support built in, but especially with Java, JSON is now first-class citizen inside the SDK, so you don't have to deal with JSON on your own. You can work with JSON very naturally directly from the SDKs. So you can think of it, we are providing you documents or meta documents which not only contain the content, but also are wrappers for the document ID, the cache value, the expiration time. So you have a very consistent experience when you're working with documents in the new API layers. Now, if you want to mutate your data, we slightly changed the wording to better reflect a document-oriented lookup pattern. So we have an upsert method, which might be familiar to you if you are coming from a SQL world. It's like a mixture between insert and update. So we will insert a document if it's not there, or we'll replace it if it's there already. If you're familiar with our old APIs, it's like the set command of some form. Then we have the insert command, which only inserts the document, and if it's already in the database, it will return with a failure. Replace is the opposite, and here you have the option between using it with or without the compare and swap value. So you can use optimistic concurrency, or you can just replace the document without taking care about the optimistic concurrency. And then finally, we have the delete method as before. Now, if you're retrieving data, you can do the primary key lookup. It's just a regular get command. You pass it the document at the end, you can fetch the document. But what we also have is the query methods. And here, we provide two types of query methods. The first one is, and how we do NQL queries, I'm really, really proud to show this to you today because it's really hot off the press. It's not even in the release developer preview. I finished this this week ago. It's a very special DSL based for NQL, which is really awesome. So you'll see that in a minute. And also additional functionality inside the SDKs is on a cluster level basis. We are providing bucket and cluster management facilities like creating documents, deleting documents, all of the administrative stuff that you want to have on the cluster level. And also on the bucket level, design document and view management, things like flush and working with counters. So the basic idea is nothing is left behind. The new API is really there to subsume all of the current behavior and wrap it to you in better to usable interfaces and provide additional functionality. So if you are using different features from the current SDKs, you can be 100% sure that you would still get all of the functionality in the new SDKs as well. Now, talking about implementations, I don't want to go into detail much about .NET here because Jeff will be showing to you all the nice stuff with .NET afterwards. So we also have the 2.0 developer preview for PHP released. So if you're a PHP developer, go check it out. There is a blog post about it from Brett Lawson. And so let's quickly talk about Java before we jump right into the code. We already released the developer preview 1. What I'm going to show you now is the new DSL stuff for NQL will be part of the next developer preview. And it's a complete rewrite compared to the current 1.4 release. It has different dependencies, and the major thing is that it is split up into a core package and language bindings. So if you're familiar with libcouchbase and our language bindings for like PHP and Ruby and Node.js and so forth, we thought about, let's also do this for the JVM, because there are more and more languages coming up on the JVM aside from Java, which are really worthwhile supporting. So there is a core package which is called Core.io, and it is a message-oriented library. And then we have language bindings on top for Java. We are looking into Scala and other languages as well. So the Core.io library, it's completely message-oriented, and it's not something that the average user works with directly. So the idea is to provide a completely asynchronous and reactive high-performing core package that does all the operations that are needed, like supporting rebalance, doing all the underlying low-level I/O stuff, handling retransmissions. So all the nitty-gritty details that all of the libraries need, but they only are worth implementing once. It is based on Netty. So Netty is the fastest I/O framework on the JVM available. Then we use RxJava. So if you're familiar with reactive extensions, it is a very powerful library to allow you to compose asynchronous workflows and do functional style asynchronous programming on top of it.
Yeah, you do some work with Natty, right, Michael?
Exactly. So thanks for mentioning. So I'm part of the core team of the Netty. So I'm part of the Netty core team. I contributed a lot of the memcached protocols in there as part of our work here. And so you should definitely check Netty out. And we're using it to some great extent. And it's really one of the I would say best I/O libraries for the JVM right now, and it's used by really large companies like Twitter and Netflix and all of those companies to power their large service-oriented infrastructure. So it's very stable and powerful. So, and then we also use the LMAX disruptor. I don't know if you've heard about that, but it's basically a high-performance ring buffer which allows you to run operations in 10, 20 million operations per second. And we are using it internally to provide back pressure and implicit batching. I won't go into much about the really low-level architecture, but very likely there will be another webinar or so where I'm talking about more about the internals. It's a complete driver, and it's the foundation. So this is just a very, very brief overview of how the core package works. You're writing messages into the core package. It gets pushed into a ring buffer. The ring buffer notifies a request handler. And then, because in Couchbase you can add and remove nodes on the fly, this is reflected in the core package. So nodes can come and go on the fly, and the client is always aware of the new configuration. And then we write down into the netted channels. We receive responses from the server. We put it into a response ring buffer, and then we complete the observables. And the observables are from RxJava, and they allow you to do all the asynchronous programming on the client side. So we are not only using asynchronous approaches inside the SDK, we are also exposing them directly to the user. So you can build your own applications on top of the same patterns as well, allowing you to build resilient and scalable applications from bottom right up to the top. But if you are only interested about doing regular blocking operations, that's also no issue at all. Every observable has the functionality so that it can block on it, and so you can always fall back to a blocking approach if you don't want to use asynchronous flows. So you get the best of both worlds, to say it like that. So here we have our JVM Core, and you can imagine we will start out with Java, but we are also very actively looking into providing Scala bindings, and it's also very easy then to add other language bindings like Ruby, JRuby, Clojure, and so forth. And you can even imagine, because of the core package is so versatile, we could even do very customized bindings, like a special binding for Hadoop and so forth. And then on top of the language bindings, we can then provide higher level integration, which we already do with Spring Data, but we can also do it for Play Framework, Rails for JRuby, and so forth. Matt, do you want to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say we've been exercising this too with JRuby. So nothing to announce here yet necessarily, but Sergey from Couchbase has been playing with putting JRuby on top of the same JVM core.
Yes, so we are really working on all that stuff, right? So the Java client is an idiomatic Java and also Java 8 API. So if you're using the new Java SDK, you can really use the latest and greatest features that are also available with Java 8, which has been released in March this year. So you can use lambdas, you can use all the nice stuff that you get with Java 8, and we will provide full support for it for the Couchbase Java client. But of course, we won't leave anyone behind. We will still support Java 6 and up, so you can be sure you can still run on your Java E6 and so forth. It's again completely asynchronous and reactive because we are not blocking on top of the core package. We are reusing all of the asynchronous flows, enriching them on the Java client side with JSON marshalling and so forth, and then provide the asynchronous results to you, and then you can decide what you want to do with it. We have first-class support for Nickel, which I'll show you in a second. We've integrated JSON support, so you don't have to use JSON on your own or so. You're working with JSON objects, JSON arrays. You can work with them like a regular Java objects, and we will take care about the actual storage underneath itself. What do we have planned for future, so post 2.0? we are planning on a JSR 107, which is the JCache specification API. So since we are moving from a cache to a document API, and JCache is now more or less the standard for caching APIs, we will also provide a JSR 107 compliant cache API, which makes it much easier to plug it into or exchange than the Couchbase JCache implementation and put it in for, let's say, EHCache or something like that. And we also plan document modeling capabilities and entity mapping on top of the raw querying capabilities. So the idea is, to some extent, if you're familiar with Spring Data and Hibernate and these type of ORMs and ODMs, provide similar support specifically for Couchbase. So you're working with a repository, you're creating user entities or blog post entities or whatever, storing them, taking them out, and don't even care about the lower-level querying capabilities. So we are really looking forward to provide a full stack and give you the full range of possibilities, going from a high level, very, very quickly getting started, but you can every time drill down into the lower levels and do stuff, special stuff if you have the need for it. And the same for Scala. The Couchbase Scala client is also something that we're looking into, the Scala bindings. And the idea is really to provide a very Scala-specific idiomatic Scala API on top of the core package and provide tight integration with frameworks like Akka and Play. So with that, enough slides. Let's jump into some actual demos.
Cool. Looking forward to it. And I get to see all the German messages too.
So let me just copy some. So I'm running Couchbase Server 2.5 on localhost, nothing fancy, so I'm not using 3.0 or anything like that. And let's just go with a blocking example first to get started easily. So I'm putting stuff in here. And
while Michael's pasting that, just want to mention to folks, you should have a Q&A, an ability to ask questions. So if you post a question there, we'll see them here, and then we'll have an opportunity to address them. So as something comes up, by all means, drop in a question.
Thanks, Matt. So let's look at a very simple example here. And ignore the query-enabled property for now. We are creating a new Couchbase cluster object here. So we are following the flow that I've been showing you on the slides before. And if you do not provide any host names, we're just connecting to localhost. But you can provide your seed nodes in here, like you could do with the old SDKs. And what we are doing then is we call open bucket on our cluster. And here we say we are opening the beer sample bucket. Or if we remove that, let's remove it, we will open the default bucket. So you can see a lot of convention over configuration. And now, what would the open bucket give us is an observable of a bucket. An observable, if you're not familiar with asynchronous programming, it's like a future on steroids of some form. So an observable, if you instruct the cluster to open the bucket, the observable tells you eventually there will be a bucket in there or there is a failure. So what you can do is you can say on my observable subscribe, and then you can call an action. You can say once I get my result here, my bucket, I can do something with it. Now this is very powerful, but in our case here, we want to block the current thread because we want to have the bucket reference available before we starting doing all our stuff. So, and RxJava, where we take the observables from, they provide the method called toBlocking, which basically takes your observable and transforms it to an iterable. And if you can think of it that way, the observable is like the cousin to the iterable in Java. The iterable is pull-based and the observable is push-based. So the observable gets new data pushed from a data source, while with an iterable, you are saying, give me more data, and so forth. So here we are blocking on our observable, and then we call the single method because we know we only get ever one result, which is our bucket response. Now, if the open bucket fails, we would not go over this line because then once we block it, we would also get the exception raised. I won't go into much detail about asynchronous exception handling, but we will have this in our documentation, and it's very easy to build that up. Now, let's do something with it. Now we've opened our bucket. Now let's store a document and retrieve it back out. So we can use the JSON document method and call create on it. And if we call create, it accepts the document ID, the content, and then some other values. So here we are calling create. The key is hello. And now, what is the value? And with the 1.4 SDK currently, what you would have to do is you would have to either store binary data, or if you want to store JSON, you would have to use something like Jackson to create JSON object and then store it. With the 2.0 SDK, what you can work with are JSON objects. So you can create an empty JSON object, and then you can put stuff inside your object. You could say first name, Michael, and so forth, and other stuff, and other properties. Or you could even create a JSON array and then add values to it. I don't know, true. Once you store this type of data, it will automatically be converted into JSON. So what we will end up with here is a document with the ID hello, and the content will be a JSON object with one key of hello, and the value would be world. So again, we are blocking here. We are calling upsert, so we insert or update the document. And the next step is to call the get method, which again loads the document and prints it out. Now, if we run this, the result is a JSON document with the content hello world. Now let's jump to our console here. If we go to buckets, documents, and search for the hello document, we can see the document content is hello world. Exactly what we've been doing inside our IDE here. So apparently it got messed up. So let's no project. There we go. Wrong project.
You mean IntelliJ got messed up in presentation mode, right?
Yes. Sorry.
Yeah.
And the presentation mode. There you go. So here we are back. Now let me give you a more complex example, because the blocking stuff is nice, but what I really wanted to show you is the asynchronous capabilities. And we are using Java 8 right now because it's much more fun than using Java 6 with anonymous classes. So let me copy that in here as well. Import all the things and make it large again so we can look through it. So what we are doing now is we are creating 100 dummy users with random ages. So you can see 100 times we create a JSON object, we give it a username, and then we create a random age, so we have some kind of entropy on our documents. And then we put the stuff into a list. The next thing we call is observable from users, which is our list. So we would create an observable which emits every JSON document that we put in our list. And then we are using flat map, and this is one of those asynchronous operators which takes our user that we get passed in here, pass it, and this is, for those who are not familiar, this is Java 8 syntax. So we are calling the upsert method on our bucket, and the lambda that gets passed in, so the user gets passed into the upsert method, and then we block on it, and wait for the last value. So what this will do, this code is, it will store our 100 objects inside Couchbase and then block once we're done with 100 objects. Now, it doesn't seem very fancy from here, but what this will do for you, it will, in parallel, store 100 documents and then wait until it's done. So it's like parallelizing this stuff into a thread pool, and managing all the threading for yourself. You can imagine that's much, much more code than 4 lines here. Now, once we stored all the 100 users, we want to fetch them out again and print the average age of all of the users. So again, we're using observable from users because we want the keys. And then we again call flatMap. And with our user here, and there you can see the syntax here is a little more verbose. So we can say, we call the get method and take the user ID from our JSON document. So we call get for every user that we've been storing previously, and then map the document from a document into an integer value of the age. So we are actually grabbing the whole document, but we are only interested in the age. So we are taking out the age and passing it on to the next function. And what the reduce function does is, for every time it gets called, here we are accumulating the value and adding the ages. So you can imagine the reduce method is called 100 times, and we are just adding up all the ages. And then finally, once we are done with all of the 100 reduces, we just subscribe to the result and print out the sum and divide it by 100, so we get the average age of the document. And again, this code doesn't look very fancy, but it's completely asynchronous, right? Everything is happening in parallel until we print it out at the end. Now, if you run this, we get 47 as a result. Now, if you run it again, there's a high chance that we get a different, so 43. So you can see, because we are creating 100 documents with a random value, it always changes. Now, for those people who are not familiar with Java 8 yet, I can show you the Java 6 variation of it. Okay, I don't have the Java 6 one here, but let me do something else. So again, let's jump into presentation mode. So because I have Java 8 running here, let's, for example, take one of those methods and don't use lambdas, but use the regular Java 6 and 7 anonymous classes. So that would be one. And you can see we get passed in our user object. The JSON document here is exactly what gets passed in here. It's just very short with Java 8. And here we'd say bucket get user. And we are returning an observable of JSON document. Expecting. So if we remove that, this actually with Java 6 and 7 looks like. And you can see here, IntelliJ is telling me, oh, the anonymous class could be replaced with a lambda because I'm running Java 8, so it will automatically change it to a lambda. But this is exactly how it would look like with Java 6. And we could do that for all of those methods. It's just a little more verbose, and the lambda style expressions are just very, very concise. So a final example that I want to show you, which I'm really excited about, is nickel querying. So let's start with something very nice. So let's get rid of that code. And we need to enable a system property because querying is still in developer preview. And you need to enable it manually because you need to run the nickel query engine separately, which I have running in a shell. So we are connecting to the beer sample bucket, and then we are running a query. We say select star from beer sample, and we limit it to 200 results. Now, what we get back is an observable of query result, and the observable can not only contain one value, but what it will actually contain, it will be called every time a result is returned from a view. So if you here, we would get 200 query results. Now, and what we want to do here in this example is we want to count the number of beers and the number of breweries that are in our results. So what we can do is we can basically, from one observable, we can attach two different streams. So we can say our first stream, we call the filter method on the observable, and we only let our result pass through if the type field in our value, so this is the content of the row, equals beer. So if it's a beer, we allow it to pass through the count method, and the count method will just increase the counter. So once the results are through, we just print out the number of beers. And we do the same for breweries. We say, with our result, if the type field in our JSON document equals brewery, then let's count the values and then subscribe and print it out. So if we run this, we would see in our 200 results, we have 162 beers and 38 breweries. And if you do the math, you actually get 200. Now we could increase it to 100 and rerun it, so you will see the numbers increasing. So this is all based on asynchronous workflows. Now, what I'm really excited about is to show you that while using raw strings is maybe nice for small stuff, what you really want to do is use a DSL, a domain-specific language, to build your NQL queries. Now, you can do that. So let me comment that out. And this is an import, so it looks much nicer. And we can say star from limit. We can, and I'll tell you more about the details. We hopefully will see the same results. Yeah. Now, what you see in the first place is that now our DSL is type safe. You don't need to pass in a full string, but you can actually type things. But what is even more important, and what I'm very excited and proud about, is that our DSL is not only a regular DSL, but it's actually a DSL which is completely aware of the NQL syntax. So it will only provide you with arguments that you can actually do as part of a NQL query. So let's say we are using limit here. The only thing, and if you look at the NQL syntax, this makes total sense. The only thing that you can provide now is an offset. And after that, there is nothing more that you can do in a NQL query, because the offset part is the last thing of a NQL query. So while here you could do a as, or you could do an inner join and so forth and use the keys method, after you are doing group by, then you can do letting. So for example, because the letting part is allows you to define alias fields for your group by definitions. And as you see here, if we are here, there is no letting method available. There's only let, and let works for the whole select expression to define aliases. The letting only works for group by. So you can see it's really semantically very strong, because it only allows you to create a DSL which is actually a valid NQL DSL. You won't run into syntax errors. Of course, you can still do semantic errors of some sort, but it allows it, or it prevents you from a large bunch of syntax errors, and it also acts as a guidance. So if you are running in your IDE, implicitly you can see which operators you can do next, basically. Now, what we can also do is, because NQL supports complex expressions, what you can do is here, for example, you use the static image which creates an expression, and then you could say, for example, first name, and suddenly you get all of those expressions which you can combine. So you could say first name and last name, or you could say maybe let's do it on the where clause. It's very nice to show there. select all from beer sample, and let's do a where clause. And we can do where clause where select all where let's say there is a, I think there's an alcohol by volume and obvious, where the alcohol by volume is greater than 10. So we would get all beers where the alcohol by volume is greater than 10. And if you want to check your nickel query and see how it looks like, you can just take the whole thing and print it out. So it converts itself into a string representation of a nickel query. We run that again and print it. You will see the select star from beer sample where alcohol by volume is greater than 10. So we are still improving the expression API even more. We will provide functions, built-in functions. Currently, we have a few of those. So if you look at there's a functions function. Got here. I think we already have counts. Yeah. So, for example, we already have round built in. So you can do select round. You can basically use the round method inside your select statement if you want to, and pass it an expression through, or you can round it to 5-digit and so forth. So what we're working on is providing more and more functions built into the system. So by when we are releasing a beta or release candidate, you will get the whole range of functions supported by Nickel also directly in the SDKs, and it's type safe and failure proof, and it's really the best way how to do Nickel queries and how to query your database from Couchbase. Now, all that stuff said, there is still, of course, there's still support for views. So on the bucket method, you can query a view query, and you can create a view query from your design document. And then you can say limit 10 and so forth, and then you would get the view results, and then you can iterate over the views. So as you see, the whole querying pattern is much more conscious, and it's really such a nice way to work with an API. I don't want to go into much more detail, but we will definitely do a webinar in the near future where I'll show you much more about what you can do with observables, how you can work with streaming responses, how you can take really the best out of Nickel querying. So you can expect there is much more to come, not only from Java. And this is why I want to hand over to the next speakers, because we have so many awesome stuff to come up as well. So I'll just stop talking and hand over again to Annie.
Hey, Annie, I think you're muted.
I'm on mute. So we have a couple questions from the audience. First question is, do I get the code samples in Java Client GitHub repo?
Yes. So you get the examples. Actually, I copied the examples right away from on the JVM Core GitHub repository. I created a temporary wiki where I pushed all those code examples in there. Right now they're in the wiki, but what we will end up, of course, at the end of the day, once we have proper documentation, you will find all the code examples with explanations in the official documentation. For now, you can find that stuff on GitHub. And if you are interested in more specific details, you can ask on the community forums. You can ping me on Twitter or write to our mailing list, and I'm more than happy to provide specific code examples or give you more pointers on how to dig into the APIs.
Cool. Okay, second question is, do I have all the operational capability without the asynchronous Java 8 stuff?
Yes. So as I mentioned briefly, you can always go back from asynchronous to synchronous. So if you use the blocking method, you get all of the iterating stuff, but now you're in a blocking method. So it's like then it's not push-based anymore, but it's pull-based. So it's like going from a very powerful concept to a little bit less powerful concept, but you still have everything available to your fingertips, even if you're using blocking type of operations.
Cool.
And also, if you're on Java 6 and 7 and you're not on Java 8, which I assume most people do in production, you can still take you can still take all of those asynchronous operations. You can still do that. It's just a little more verbose than it is with Java 8. And you can take all of that stuff that I've showed you right now and use it with Java 6 today.
All right.
Very
well,
nice.
thank you. Thank you, Michael, for that. We're going to actually switch it over to Jeff with .NET. Here you are, Jeff.
Hey, Michael, thank you very much for that. It's very great. It's a great presentation. Just give me 1 second here while I get set up.
And of course, anyone who's watching, if you do have additional questions, by all means, post them here. We're going to do some other Q&A here at the end. So just bear with us for a little bit.
Okay, guys, can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, great. Once again, my name is Jeffry Morris. I'm the .NET SDK advocate at Couchbase. I'm going to go over, actually do a couple demos. We'll talk a little bit about the .NET SDK and how to get started with it, working with it, and then go from there. Importantly, we've just released Developer Preview 2. You can read about it at this blog, the URL posted here. You can also download the binaries there and example app. I'm going to skip a few slides because I'd rather get to the actual demo. I think it'll be it'll show you better. Okay, let me switch over to IDE here. So the first demo I'm going to show is really quick how to get up and running with the new .NET SDK. You'll notice there's a lot of similarities with the Java SDK. There's also some differences. So let me get started here. So first of all, you start off with the concept. We have the concept of a Couchbase cluster. The Couchbase cluster is your basically it maintains all your bucket resources, all your TCP connections, and it shares them and kind of uses them in a in a way, it manages them in a way so that you are not leaking resources, etc. To start off with the .NET client, the first thing you do is you initialize the cluster. There's two ways to do it. We support convention over configuration, and so if you just want to get up and running and you want to look at localhost, assuming you have a Couchbase server running on localhost, you simply type Couchbase cluster and .initialize, and you'll have access, and you'll be connected to the localhost version of Couchbase server. However, if you want to go a little deeper, you can create a configuration and pass that in as well. And from here, your options are, you have several options. You can point to a different URL. So you can point to a different cluster. URI here. Maybe once. Maybe a little cut and paste here. Can't remember the URI. And then you simply pass this configuration into your initialize function, and now instead of connecting to localhost, you're going to connect to the Couchbase server at 192.168.56.102. So now you're going to get a cluster object to work with, and that's simply by calling hello.
I was just going to say, I see lots of IntelliSense in there, including the docs and all, which is awesome.
Yeah, correct. That really helps you kind of get going and makes it more intuitive. It shows you what methods you have available and kind of what they do. So now I got my cluster, and I'm going to do some work with the cluster. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the default bucket. So I'm going to So I'm going to work with the default bucket, and there's a method called the open bucket. That method, convention over configuration, will return, if you call open bucket, it will return the default bucket. If you'd like to pass in an overload, you could pass in the bucket name to connect to another bucket. And optionally, you can add in your password as well. Once you have your bucket, you now can do some queries, or do some. You can insert some documents. So as Michael, mentioned, that we're with Couchbase, we have this one of the strong JSON document approach, and with that, the clients themselves now are much. They're designed to work with documents, JSON documents, and the Couchbase, the .NET client is no different. So all I'm going to do is create a document here. I'm using an anonymous type. Works fairly well with the clients. Give it an ID. So let's see, I'll call this doc2, so you guys already have one in there. Give it a name. I'll just say, name. And once you see the IntelliSense, so I go down. I'll give it a type. Call this person. Okay, once you have a document, now you can do an insert simply by calling the insert method on the bucket. You're going to pass in a key. In this case, the ID of the document will be the key, and then the document itself. Note that the document itself, here I'm using an anonymous type, but it could also be a POCO. It could be maybe a plain old CLR type or CLR object. Anonymous type makes it really easy to work with, so I'm going to use that here. And once I've done that, do a quick write line and say status, and I'll give it the and then I'll stop the console. Stop the console. I'll run this real quick. And see what happens. You should see. There you go. Inserted key and true. Oh, my apologies here. There should be the document ID.
I almost said something, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah. Demos. Give it just a second. And there's your doc ID, your doc2. Actually, it didn't insert because I already called this method once. Insert will only allow you to insert if the key doesn't exist. In this case, it does exist. So to change this, I'd have to call one of our other newer methods, which is upsert or replace.
That minor demo error allowed us to demo another feature, I guess.
Exactly.
Cool.
Okay, so that's your basic. That's your basic inserting a document in the database. By default, or I should say, the client also supports NQL queries, ad hoc NQL queries. So assuming you have NQL up and running, or you have the NQL developer preview 3 running, you can run queries against the bucket. So I'll just type a quick query here. Oh, there's just iterate over this. Using the dynamic keyword helps here. Makes it a lot easier. I'll just drop the query into there. And look at the rows. In this case, I'll do F name. That's the first name. And this should work.
Taking a little while.
Taking a little while.
Yeah.
Okay, it's taking a little while. Let me move on from that. Let me constrain the query a little bit. I gotta.
I think it was with the capital I, right? Yeah.
Yep, it's capital I.
Huh. Maybe it's still working on the previous query.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, it could be. Sorry about that. But anyways, this does show you how you can pass in an ad hoc query into the client, into a bucket on the client. And additionally, we also support view queries. I'll just do a quick example here. Query to create query, development equal to true. You add in your design doc here. And then similar to the Java client, it has a kind of a fluent interface type DSL where you can it'll basically help you to build out your query. And you would simply pass this in, and running this, it'll execute against the cluster and return back the results.
Does this one have first names?
No.
Ah.
Actually, design doc's not right, so I'm actually going to skip over this one because I actually want to make sure I get to the link provider.
Cool.
And SSL. So I'm going to jump over and try out the demo SSL. Go back So with Couchbase Server 3.0, we're releasing a new feature that allows you to encrypt the data between the client and the server. Currently in 2.5, we allow you to encrypt data between nodes within a cluster if you're using XDCR. With 3.0, we allow the data to be encrypted between the client and the server, which is in certain scenarios, in cases where you require to have your data encrypted over the wire. It's a very good feature. Getting started with the feature is really easy, assuming you don't yet have 3.0, but assuming you had Server 3.0, you would go into your settings, you would generate a SSL certificate, you would copy that to your application machine, and you would store it in your certificate authority, your local certificate authority, and then after that, all you have to do is enable SSL on the client. And then once you enable SSL on the client will, even if you have, your URLs are pointing to the non-SSL ports, it'll swap out all the ports so that you are using SSL ports. I'll do a quick demo of that. So actually going to copy and paste here. And so first of all, I'll demonstrate no SSL. And what I'll do is I'll simply insert a couple of key value pairs into Couchbase Server at this URL, and then what I'll do is open up Wireshark and start a capture, and then we'll view it. We'll view what's going over the wire, and we should be able to see the unencrypted, the plain text. There we go. We go back into Wireshark, and we do a quick filter.
So right now what Jeff is doing is he's filtering it down to the SSL port associated with its TCP.port. Yeah, filtering it down to the SSL port that we use with Couchbase Server. So if the demo goes well, what we will see is garbage.
Actually, in this case, it's this is plain text right here.
Oh, this is the clear one.
This is plain text. This is clear text.
Yeah, and just a little bit of background. Historically, most of the time when you work with your database server, you do that in sort of a trusted part of your network. But there are situations, especially situations like public cloud and so forth, where people want to encrypt the data just to make sure that there's another layer of protection. So
here you go. Thanks, Matt.
Sure.
So here you go. Here's the data going over the wire unencrypted. As you can see, key 1 and some value. And I'll close this really quick and clear that. Now I will enable SSL, and all you have to do is set one configuration setting, true. Notice I didn't have to change any I didn't have to change my URI or anything. That's it. And I'm going to run this again, and then I'll check out the capture, and we should see gobbledygook. So jump back into Wireshark and PC port. Apply. You see, I'm using now I'm using port 11207. And if I do a follow TCP stream here, you'll see it's gobbledygook. So now your plain text, your data getting sent across the wire is no longer plain text, it is encrypted.
Awesome. And most of that negotiation just happened automatically between the client and the server, right? So the configuration, it's not like you had to tell it what port number it was and all of that fun stuff. You just had to say use SSL, and of course here's the certificate, which is a requirement to get SSL going in the first place.
Correct, Matt. Yeah, it's very easy to get up and running. So now I'm going to switch over and do a sneak peek here on our link to Couchbase provider that we just started working on here. It's pretty cool. It's a layer over the, I think it's really cool. It's a layer over the Couchbase client. And what it does is using a link, simply using the link syntax, it'll admit NQL queries, and then the NQL query will get executed by the client. I'll jump back into that demo really quick. And what I'll do is a little more cut and paste. So what I'm doing here is start off, I open up my cluster, just like I did earlier. Once I open up my cluster, I'm opening up a tutorial bucket. This is part of the NQL Developer 3.0 samples. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a query here using link syntax, and I'm going to use my source. I'm going to target a POCO, which is just a plain old .NET object. Here's what the POCO actually looks like. I'm using JSON properties to map JSON fields to kind of the .NET or C# convention, camel case convention, or excuse me, Pascal case convention. And once they're here, I'll do is I'll project that into a new anonymous type, and then on this line, on line 28, I'll actually emit the query so you can take a look at it, and then I'll iterate through the contact list. And there we go. So select C-age, C.email, F-name from tutorial C. Here's the results set. Pretty cool stuff. If you want to admit the whole document, using anonymous type, you just do a select C, and now it'll return the entire document. As you can see, the syntax or the document, the returned object has changed from being a anonymous type to the actual POCO. So these auto-generated function or properties no longer are valid. So what you actually have here is IntelliSense.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool stuff.
Bit of a bug here on my side.
Yeah, we have to get them all if we want to write them out.
Yeah, yeah. So there we go. Pretty cool. And like I said, if you want to emit an anonymous type, you simply use the syntax, the anonymous type syntax. So you can say, you can call this so. Actually, I'll just do this u dot first name. This is making it. And run this. Oop. The mapping wasn't correct because it's an anonymous type, and I'm not using those JSON properties. You need to actually map to the document structure. So the document structure is first is fname, email, age. That's something that will be changed in later release.
Yeah, so this is code that Jeff has really gotten going here in the last couple of weeks. So we wanted to show it off because we want to get feedback from everyone on where we're going and the syntax and so forth. But as always, very fresh code. You got a couple of things that you may have to work through.
Yeah, yes, sir. And
the demo left there. Run it one more time. That's how it worked.
And there's your output.
Cool.
So very cool. So, the important part is it brings this to .NET developers. It brings the familiar link syntax to Couchbase. It allows them to do very powerful queries over JSON documents. Really cool. It should bring kind of a whole new level of productivity to .NET developers that are choosing to use Couchbase as their persistent store. Very cool stuff.
Awesome.
Yeah, very nice, Jeff.
That's all I got.
Cool.
Just that.
So I want to open up the floor to some questions on Jeff's presentation. Does anybody have any questions? You see there's one here from Michael's. The question is, we'll do that one first and see if anything else comes up for Jeff. This looks like it will be much clearer in Scala. How much longer until we see the Scala API version?
So we are actively looking into providing a Scala API. I would say it's definitely on the radar. We are also working very closely with the person from France. I don't even want to try to pronounce his name because it won't be right anyway. So we definitely have people working who are doing community contributions to providing Scala wrappers around the old Java SDK, and we are actively looking to getting those involved. So we hope to have something showable in the next few months, definitely, because I also want to develop the Scala one in parallel with the Java one, just because to see how modular our core really is and what we can refactor out into util libraries while we are developing it. So you should be on the lookout in the next few months, but going further, we love contributions. So if you want to participate, it would be awesome, and I would volunteer, of course, if you want to jump into the deep water. I would be definitely there to guide you and help you out, and just we can get it done together. So we love contributions.
Yeah, very cool.
Cool.
And with Scala, I mean, the whole Java 8 stuff is even much nicer in Scala. So because you get, and one thing to point out, we're using Rx Java, and there are Rx Scala bindings there as well. So the Scala module will use the Rx Scala bindings, and there it very nicely fits into the Scala programming model, because Scala already has a much richer functional programming approach. So this stuff maps out much nicer with Java than it does with Java 8.
Cool. Thanks so much for that, Michael. So are there any other questions? Does anybody have anything else they want to talk about or say before we get off here?
And if you have questions, I think there's a place where you can post them.
Yep. There's a Q&A app on the left-hand side. Okay, so I just want to thank everybody for coming out once again. You can check out our events on couchbase.com/events. We have several webinars coming up for mobile, PayPal webinar with an analyst from GigaOM coming up. That's couchbase.com/webinars. Also, in addition, we'll be doing this Hangout bi-monthly with different subtopics. If you have any suggestions, feel free to let us know, either on Twitter, Google, and otherwise, I think that's it.
Thanks, everyone. Awesome demos. Thanks, Michael. Thanks for the overview, Don. Thanks, Jeff. Much appreciated.
Thanks, everyone, for listening, tuning in.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
All right. Bye, guys.
See ya.
Bye.